So this session is about education and gamification and where the two things intersect, and of course how that feeds into financial services, fintech, and the wider context. And I'm delighted to be here today. Again, I've been asked to come on to talk about this. So this is about playing. This is about a bit more than playing, actually. So I'm just going to take you through some key principles of gamification. I don't want to do too much of a lecture. Of course, that's what I sort of do in my day job. And you probably see in your handouts, I did used to be in the financial services industry. And walking in to London this morning, I just remembered how much I don't miss traveling to London anymore and being stuck on the train. But anyway. So for my sins, yes, I'm currently acting assistant head of school. I also run the MBA at Brunel. But let's crack on. What is this about, really? There's going to be four aspects to this, and I'll be gentle, I'll take you through each of the four aspects. But really, let's just talk about one key thing. Financial markets and financial services industry is complex. It's a complex space. And we have to understand that. We only have to look at the last week, and I'll try to avoid references to Barclays, Bob Diamond, Libor, and all the rest of it. I don't want to bring that in today. But these things are quite complex. And when we start thinking about gamification and how do we actually incentivize people to take part in the financial services sector, we have to consider various aspects of how that complexity actually works. Let's see if I can get this to work. So just taking a cue from a couple of famous people, Russell Lakoff, Mike Pidd, and Dan Ritchie, we have to consider what we're dealing with here. The financial services sector and the financial services world, this whole landscape is a mixture of various things. And some people like to consider complexity in three levels. I quite like this structure. Is the financial services world, financial services sector, and the services that we offer to individuals, consumers, stakeholders, and financial institutions, is it at one of these three levels? At the highest level, we're dealing with when some might say, this is where we are with the current financial system, a complete mess. Yeah. A complex system which is not very well formulated or defined. Everything is so interconnected. The whole infrastructure is so interconnected now, it's like a game of Jenga. You move one piece and things could start falling apart. Who's going to blink first? The next level is, well, are we talking about a system and an infrastructure and a set of services which is effectively a set of problems? Pretty well defined, formulated, but with no clear single solution. Or are we talking about, at the lower level here, a puzzle? Are we looking at financial services and systems and innovation in terms of a set of defined problems and we've got answers for them? Well, what could it be? We don't know. But just to give you some ideas of how we can frame these types of conceptualizations, at the very highest level, we've got something like the World Food Programme. This is a very high-level, abstract, complex, integrated issue. At the next level here, we've got problems which are, for example, peak oil is one example of a view of complexity, credit crunch. Or, to put it in even more simple terms, hey, my mortgage. Where all you have to do is have to find the best mortgage, the best deal, optimize your frontier horizon, bang, you've solved your problem. So we have to first of all consider when we're thinking about financial services and thinking about gamifying financial services and the infrastructure is what level of complexity are we dealing with? Are we really at the top level here when we're looking at the whole of the sector, or are we at the level of actually point solutions? Are we at the level of actually consumerizing those services? Now, if you consider where we are today, the one thing that really speaks to us is, given everything else that's happening, the one thing that's on everybody's mind is the financial sector. Behind everything is the financial sector, but behind all of that is human behavior. And moving that stream of thought on now, we also have to consider humans are involved in this system as well. And if you speak to, and if you listen to behavioral scientists, and here are a few of them, Ron DeBont, Richard Thaler, and everybody's favorite skeptic, Nicholas Taleb, they'll tell you two things. And human behavior is very important when we're talking about finance as well. They'll tell you two, but these guys will tell you two things. They'll either tell you one thing that, hey, humans always make the same sorts of decisions. We know what types of decisions they will make. Those decisions will either be based on bias, on myopia, short-sightedness, they'll be based on optimization, loss aversion, adjusting risk profiles, and this idea of rational expectation, the rational markets hypothesis. That's well known. On the other hand, you have people like Nicholas Taleb, and I don't think he's in the room, but he would say something like, well, hang on guys, the improbable does occur. These black swan events do occur, and guess what? We've had 3 in the last week. So these things happen. Oh, and by the way, it's always somebody else's fault. Human behavior, though, is an important intrinsic part of what we're looking at. So that's another key aspect there. And we know, of course, what happens when human behavior gets in the way of financial markets, don't we? You get things like this happening. Shock and awe, you want to call it something else, you call it the credit crunch, you call it deleveraged positions. Behind it all, though, this is this issue of complexity. And I'm sure you can read the orange writing there. It's about decoding the complexity of the financial market. It's about decoding the complexity of financial services and financial systems. These things are interwoven together. And it's very difficult to identify what piece to attack first. Some people, I'm sure today as well, will be talking and thinking about the technology space. Absolutely right. Some people will be thinking and talking about the provision space. Again, absolutely right. Humans are at the other end of the scale as well, so we need to consider them. Gamification. Well, now we're talking about something else. Now we're talking about something different. If we know a financial system works, and we know that humans are part of it, and technology is a part of it, then where does gamification come in? Well, gamification is based upon the notion of a game. Now, you can ask anybody really, even a child. I even asked my children at home when I was preparing this presentation, how do you define a game? What is a game? And some people might argue financial sector, banking systems, they are the biggest game of all. But what defines a game? Well, here are some key points here. Clearly, there's always objectives, there's always a reward, there's always a payoff. There's a level of immersion that we need to consider as well. And if we're talking about providing services and providing technology platforms to include people, and we heard some of the innovation ideas this morning as well, some very interesting perspectives on how we can include people and we can include information and data in providing those services, then we also need to have this point up here. We need to have a story. There needs to be something that links it all together. There needs to be an objective. There needs to be an end to it all. Now, okay, I will mention Barclays, and I will mention some of the other banks as well. But one of the key aspects of gamification and one of the key aspects of learning from experiences is this thing up here. The search for meaning and the search for consequences. Without consequences, we don't learn. And I'll come back to this point of learning shortly as well. One other thing that we've heard this morning, and I know in discussions with colleagues in the room, it's something certainly that Anthemis are looking at, and I know that several other partners and colleagues in the room are looking at as well, is this idea of shared experience. Yeah? There's no point winning a game, or there's no point achieving something if you can't share it with somebody. So gamification and the concepts of challenge, objectives cannot be useful if they're just within a vacuum. So there is something about shared experience. There is something about, as Uday mentioned this morning, the social network, the social technological network that is important in this sphere as well. But okay, as an academic, I guess I've got to give you the textbook definition, and here it is. It's just but one. What is gamification? It's using game design techniques and approaches in order to create a deeper level of engagement with an audience. That's what we're talking about. When we're talking about gamification, financial services, within industry, what we want to do is we actually want to involve people. And again, I'm going to bring back the human behavior part here. It's great, it's all very well to have a technology platform, but the human is at the other end of the screen. And I don't know if you've downloaded them, but here's some examples of a couple of games that are already out there that are using well-known brand names. Cash IQ, I think that's American Express. 56 Sage Street, is that Barclays? I can't remember. But there are already games and applications out there that you can download. These are iPhone games, of course, where you get involved, you get immersed in play. You get immersed in achieving a goal. You get immersed in doing something where you are a direct participant. And this is what gamification is about. Here's something that I spotted on the net. Can't remember where I found it, but a couple of weeks ago, I think about more than a couple of weeks ago, there was a Beta Splash convention on gamification, and some of these areas of where games can be used and where they have an impact were highlighted. And it's interesting that I found this slide somewhere off the internet a good couple of years ago, about 4 or 5 years ago, but now these ideas are now beginning to make a real deep impact. So without getting into too much detail here, you've got different sectors vertically here, and you've got different types of uses for games. But I just want to pull out a few things here just to highlight where gamification and the idea of games and challenge could be useful in financial services. So for example, one idea and one area is just in terms of customer education and awareness. Interacting with the Amex game, for example, on your iPhone gives you better insight into how credit scoring works, how access to credit works, liquidity works. On the other hand, those sort of games can be just used to inform the public. Now, currently, of course, the sector has got a very big challenge in terms of making it clear to the public and the world at large what are the consequences of some of the actions and inactions that are happening today. And a lot of that is education and a lot of that is information. But that's where games can be used. But there's another side to it, which is the big data play, which is in terms of data collection. If we can understand how people use services, if we can understand how people wish to use services and wish to use their behaviors to consume those services, we might be able to plan for the future. And that's an important aspect. Clearly, there's a key here, key aspect in terms of product information can be used for marketing. And the area that I'm interested in is the last two, or last three in fact. Continuing education, unsurprising, come from a university, which could be in terms of workforce, but the big one is learning. And as consumers, and maybe as sophisticated consumers of financial products, over the years we have gradually learned about, well, what is a bank account all the way through to what is a CDO squared, well, if you're that way inclined. But this is about a gentle process of learning, of developing, and gamification can help us in that way. Now, just wanted to show you some research that we've done at Brunel into using games for management education, but there's some useful corollaries with how that can be used in financial services as well. And we've used something, I don't know if anybody's played it in this room. We use a simulation called MarkStrat. It was developed at INSEAD. We've run it for many years at Brunel. I've been a student of this myself. I've played it. It's very good fun. Very boring to look at. We're not talking avatars. We're not talking iPhone application. It is just literally what you would get in offices just like this, numbers. And all you have to do is look at numbers and you have to make decisions based on numbers. Very boring, but actually very real. But what have we found? So when we've talked to students and we've talked to executives and we've talked to people who are playing this type of game, they've found a few things. Or rather, we found a few things, sorry. What people find is they tend to understand how things are priced. Pricing is a key component of any market. And this is probably even more important than managing the wealth of information coming at you. We experience that every day. But one thing that we found was that pricing is something that can be understood through playing a game. The other thing is an important learning aspect, which is about increasing confidence. Now, as consumers ourselves, but also as people developing products, platforms, and offerings, it would be nice if we could consider how we can raise the confidence level of those people we wish to influence. And that is about allowing people to take calculated risks. Now, okay, you have to be careful here because there's no point taking a calculated risk without having experience of fatal consequences. Now, we have to take that with a pinch of salt. But the idea here is that if you engage people in achieving an outcome and achieving some sort of optimized realization of what they're trying to do, you can get them to increase their level of confidence. The other key aspect that we found when talking to people was that just through engaging in a game, engaging in an objective, it allows people to increase the level of processing capability, information processing capability. They get used to it. The more times you see a stack of numbers on the screen, the more times you get used to it. This is how traders learn, I guess. This is how bankers learn. Okay, I won't say whether or not bankers and traders actually learn, but that's a topic for another day. And the last thing is this clear aspect of immersion, of flow, experiential learning. Playing games actually works because you get to learn something. You get to learn about the game, you get to learn about what you're trying to achieve, and you get to learn about yourself as well. You get to learn about the market too. But these are some of the key aspects here. I won't bore you with this. This is from a research paper. But what did we find? We found that experience and reflection combined with experimentation allows two types of human behavior to come out. Those people who want to act and just do something. You know, they want to play the game. Don't stop me, don't tell me, don't preach to me, don't lecture me about what the game is about. I just want to have a go. You know, how many people in the room, when they see a game, they just dive straight into it? I know I do. Okay, I just want to have a go. I want to learn by experience. At the other end, you have people who are pragmatic and they want to just reflect and they want to observe and they want to see, well, okay, this is a chess game, so how does it work? But there's an interesting dynamic here. There's an interesting interplay here, because you'll get the experimenters who actually will take benefit from the pragmatists. From the activists will take benefit from the pragmatists. And ultimately, when you bring a community of these people together, a community of learners who are learning about a game, who are involved, engaged, they're immersed in doing a shared experience, there's a massive learning opportunity here. And that's one thing we found almost straight away. It doesn't matter which end of the scale you are. If you want to get involved or you just want to observe and you want to take your time. At the end of the day, we're talking about a learning opportunity. And so that's where I want to sort of head towards now and sort of end on, is this aspect of learning. And again, just to come back to this idea of shared learning, of course, coming from a university, but then also coming from a background in the city, we're talking about shared human experiences here. This is the academy, and in the middle you can probably see, if you can make them out, if you've seen this in Florence, that's Plato and Socrates. This was the idea of a university. This was the idea of a shared learning space. Not somewhere where you get lectured, not somewhere where you get told to do exams. And I've got to be careful here because, again, I'm from a university. But here's an idea for you. Can we use games within a marketplace? Can we use games within a shared community to learn from each other within that community? And that's what this image here is trying to portray. We're talking about a range of different people, a range of different experiences, a range of different behaviors, and these things can come together quite well. But the problem that we've got, again, and I'm linking to the first slide, one or two slides I had at the front, is that you have got a multitude of platforms, and I couldn't fit them all on, but there's probably another 10, 15 screens of startups, logos, and other platforms I could display here. And we have to learn how to harness that, and that's part of the complexity that's involved. All right, that's interesting. What do we do now? Now what? We have to think carefully about this. If we're talking about gamification and using games for educating consumers, for educating the marketplace, using games as a vehicle for financial services reform even, then we need to consider two things. I'm going to offer you 2 points here. The first one is this idea of praxis. Now, what is praxis? Very straightforward. Praxis is managing meaning and managing action. I talked about meaning before when I talked about responsibility and consequences. But it's actually combining that, and if you like, the other words that I used, pragmatism versus activism. And engaging people on financial services platforms, whatever type of platforms they might be, either social platforms or pure technology platforms, involves these two parts. Action and reaction, if you like. The other aspect is meaning. I'll leave you with this one. I hope this is the last slide, and I'm running out of time. There's a big confusion when we talk about gaming between what is a game and what is a simulation. And we need to sort of separate those things out. At the top end, there might be something as simple as a game, tic-tac-toe, Tetris, all the way down to modeling. Are we modeling the risk behavior of a financial market, of a capital market, all the way through to, are we actually doing some sort of simulation? Are we trying to model reality here? So we have to be careful about considering what are we trying to gamify. And we had that discussion with somebody earlier on. What is the purpose of a game? Are we doing it for the sake of developing a game, or are we trying to achieve an outcome or a reaction? So gamification, I think, is about making practice, providing practice of reality and the consequences of decisions that are made within a game. And that's a pretty hard thing to do. It's a pretty difficult thing to do. But just to conclude, and this is my last slide, I'll leave you with a sunset slide here. Gamification is, and I take this from a philosophical or spiritual standpoint, because I guess that's the type of guy I am, it's about learning to play, but also playing to learn. And those aspects are as follows. We know that there's a level of complexity of interaction here. We can't ignore this human element. We have to take into consideration the way that humans make decisions and the behaviors that they use, and when do they make those changes, or when do they make those decisions? How do they make those decisions? Gamification must incorporate that as well. We have to learn, or get users or consumers to learn about the consequences of their decisions. This is pretty important. Not too clear myself on whether the financial services industry is able to do that itself. But we also have to think about building for the future. We have to think about how we will observe and experiment from these types of learning interventions, these types of gaming experiences. And actually, if we're talking about using games and the concept of games within financial services and financial technology, we actually need to think about something even more radical. We have to think about changing the game. Now, when I talk about changing the game, I'm alluding to this whole idea of an innovation lab, the whole idea of innovation. We have to think about the way we want to innovate. We have to think about the way in which we share and the way in which rewards are then given to consumers. And I'm sort of trying to make a segue here now to the other panel members. But I think this is one of the key aspects of gamification that I'd like to end on here. Is games are not only about learning, they're not only about interaction, they're not only about behaviors, but there has to be, I believe, it's my personal view here, not a university view or an Anthemis view, there has to be some aspect of altruism. And you would have heard and seen platforms such as Kiva. Anybody heard of Kiva? Yeah, everybody knows Kiva. That's very altruistic. But guess what? It's got a market share. Now, does that equate to a profit margin? I don't know. But there is something in it. There is something there that is about changing the game. You can call that bottom of the pyramid if you like, but we really are talking about changing the way in which we view the whole idea of innovation in financial services. So with that, I'll end if I'm on time or not, and happy to take any questions. Thank you.